Welcome to lesson number 2, separating a mixture. Our lesson objectives determine how to separate different types of mixtures. We can separate mixtures based on the physical properties such as boiling point and freezing point, density, particle size, solubility, as well as magnetism. So let's go through some of the techniques for separating various mixtures. The first one I'm going to talk about is going to be filtration. This allows us to separate a solid from a liquid. And so if you've made coffee before, you've done this, where you put filter paper in and the solid coffee grinds are separated out from the liquid going through. And the same thing in a colander when you're pouring boiling water with spaghetti or pasta through the colander. The solid pasta gets stuck in the colander and the liquid goes through the holes. So here's a typical lab setup where we have filter paper put into a glass funnel. We would pour a mixture containing a solid and liquid. The solid residue gets stuck in the filter paper because it's too large to pass through, and then the liquid's going to go through, separating it out. The next apparatus is called a distillation apparatus. When we distill something, we're separating two or more liquids, and it's based on differences in their boiling point. So if we placed two different liquids into this flask here, and we heated them, the one with the lowest boiling point is going to boil first. It's going to turn to a gas, as you see here. This gas travels up the tube and goes into this structure called the condensing tube, which is basically pumped with cold water. Cold water is going to condense the gas particles back to a liquid, as you see here, which gets collected on this side. We take away this flask, put a new one, and then we can then separate out more liquids if there are more liquids in this mixture. So we could separate out, 5, 6, 7 different liquids as long as they have different boiling points. And this is actually how they process alcohol for consumption. They distill it. They remove impurities. The next technique we have is very simple evaporation. And evaporation allows us to separate aqueous solutions. So when we have an aqueous solution, remember that's a solid dissolved in water, like salt water. If I want to separate them out, I can using evaporation, and I can actually speed that up by even heating it. And by doing so, the water then evaporates out, and we're left with the residual solid that was in there that was initially dissolved. So if it's salt water, when I evaporate out all the water, I'm left with the solid NaCl salt compound. Another process is chromatography. Actually, in your living environment course, you did this in one of your state labs. Chromatography separates particles based upon their size and the polarity, the charge. And this is a typical chromatography setup here, and you should remember the nice color separations that we see, as you can see here. So what we do is, for example, you're going to place a sample of, let's say, an ink on the chromatography paper, and we're going to place it into a liquid that it will dissolve in, and the liquid gets pulled upwards through the paper, and what it does is it's going to push these particles based upon their size, and so you can see here the larger particles don't go as far and the smaller particles travel the furthest, and it separates out based upon those size particles here, and you can see this is the result of our chromatography. Also used in your forensic science courses if you take any of those. So let's see an example. You have a student and they want to separate a solution of sugar water. So they took some sugar, dissolved it in water, made a solution of sugar water. What method would they use to separate those things out? And so if you think back to our salt water, it's going to be the same process. We'd want to use evaporation. We want to heat it to get rid of the water. We're going to drive off all the water. As the water turns to a gas, we're going to be left with, instead of the salt on the bottom, we'll have the sugar left on the bottom. So let's check your understanding. Can you determine how to separate different types of mixtures? At this point, you should be able to determine how to separate different types of mixtures based upon the substances that are involved.